The letter that never reached her due. You believe some hearts stay connected even when life pulls them apart. Do you think silence can speak louder than every word ever said? This is not a story about fame or glamour, but about timing, love, and destiny. The story begins in a quiet corner of a Los Angeles cafe, far away from flashing lights and movie sets. Keanu sat by the window wearing a simple black jacket, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses. Outside, the city moved with its usual noise, but inside, the world felt slow. He was reading a letter that looked old, the edges slightly torn, the ink faded. It was a letter he had written 20 years ago but never sent. It was meant for Sandra. Back then, they had just finished filming together. People said their chemistry was unreal, but to them, it felt real in ways neither could explain. They laughed during breaks, shared quiet meals, and sometimes spoke about life after fame. Keanu admired her honesty, her warmth, the way she made everyone around her feel safe. But he also knew she had her walls, and behind those walls, pain she rarely spoke of. In those days, Keanu was still learning how to live with loss. The world saw him as calm and strong, but inside, he carried the silence of every person he had loved and lost. That silence made him careful with emotions, almost too careful. So instead of telling Sandra how deeply he felt for her, he wrote a letter. It wasn't a confession. It was gratitude. A thank you for making the world lighter, for reminding him that kindness could heal unseen wounds. He wrote it one night after shooting Under the Rain, but he never mailed it. He thought maybe she already knows. Years passed. They worked on different films, met at events, smiled for cameras. But whenever she laughed, a part of him wondered if she ever sensed what was unspoken. The cafe door opened, breaking his thoughts. A fan recognized him and smiled shyly. Keanu smiled back, folded the letter carefully, and placed it inside his jacket. The waitress brought him a refill and said softly, "You look like you're thinking about someone." He smiled again but didn't answer. He rarely did. That evening, as the sky turned golden, he walked toward the beach. He loved sunsets. They reminded him that endings could still be beautiful. As he walked along the shore, a small group of people nearby were watching old movie clips on a tablet. He heard laughter and familiar voices, his and Sandra's from the past. The scene was from their first movie together. He stopped for a moment, not to watch, but to listen, and in that laughter, he felt something shift inside. That night, he went home and placed the letter on his desk. His small apartment was quiet, filled with books, guitars, and old photographs. He looked at one picture from a film premiere long ago, Sandra standing beside him, smiling like the world had no shadows. He whispered to himself, "Some things never fade." The next day, a journalist called him for an interview. The theme was love and letting go. He almost refused, but then agreed. During the interview, the host asked, "Have you ever loved someone you couldn't tell?" The question hit him harder than he expected. He paused, looked down, and after a long silence said, "Sometimes silence is a kind of love, too." After the interview went viral, Sandra watched it. She was sitting in her kitchen, wearing an old sweatshirt, drinking tea. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends saying, "Did you hear what he said?" She clicked the link, watched his eyes, and for a moment, her heart raced the way it once did. Memories flooded back, the quiet drives, the inside jokes, the times he listened without judgment when she spoke about her fears. She remembered one night when the crew had left, and they sat near the set lights talking about dreams that felt impossible. He had said, "Sometimes the universe hides what's meant to be until we're ready." She had laughed, not knowing how much he meant it. But now, watching that interview, she felt something unresolved stir inside her. After all these years, could it be that he still felt the same? That night, she searched through an old box in her house where she kept letters, scripts, and memories from the past. Inside, she found a small photograph of both of them sitting on a bench between takes. She smiled softly. But then she noticed something odd, a folded piece of paper behind the photo. It wasn't hers. It was a note written in Keanu's handwriting. It said, "For Sandra someday." Her hands trembled. The paper was yellowed, fragile, and incomplete. Only half the page remained. The rest had been torn or lost. She read the words again and again. It felt like a missing piece of a story she never knew existed. Was it a note he meant to give her and never did? Or something that got left behind on set? She didn't know. But the timing was too strange. After all these years, the words, "For Sandra, someday," had appeared again right after that interview. She closed her eyes, holding the note close to her heart, whispering his name like a secret prayer. The city outside was alive, but inside her home, time felt still. Meanwhile, in his apartment, Keanu couldn't sleep. He opened the old letter again, wondering if it was finally time to let it go. He thought about sending it or maybe just rewriting it, but something inside told him not yet. Instead, he opened his notebook and began writing new lines, the kind that only come when memories refuse to fade. He wrote about patience, about meeting someone whose soul mirrors yours, about the strange peace of knowing they exist even if they are not yours to keep. The night grew silent. His pen stopped moving. Outside, rain began to fall softly, like the world itself was remembering something. He looked at the clock. It was past midnight, and at that exact moment, miles away, Sandra couldn't sleep either. She walked to her balcony, the same rain touching her face, and whispered, "Why does it still feel like yesterday?" They both stood under the same rain, unaware that destiny had just started rewriting their story. The message that never reached his phone: "Do you believe that life sometimes sends us signals we ignore until it is too late? Do you think two souls can keep circling around each other until one finally stops running?" That night changed something neither Keanu nor Sandra could name. The next morning, sunlight crept through Sandra's curtains as she sat at her kitchen table holding the note again. Her fingers traced the faded words. "For Sandra, someday." It felt like a whisper from another lifetime. She thought of calling him, but didn't. She had his number, but it had been years since she last used it. Fame and schedules had built a quiet distance between them. Not hostility, just time. She placed the note beside her cup of tea and opened her phone. Her social feed was full of clips from his recent interview. The world was talking about how sincere he looked, how his words about love and silence felt deeper than any movie script. People wrote things like, "He must be talking about someone real." Sandra smiled faintly. If only they knew how real it was. She closed her phone and walked to her garden. The air was cool, soft sunlight resting on the flowers she had planted years ago. Her dog followed her closely, sensing her mood. She whispered, "You think I should call him?" The dog wagged its tail, and she laughed, shaking her head. "You always say yes." Meanwhile, across the city, Keanu was driving along the coast road. The rain from the night before had left the world clean, shining. He rolled down the window, letting the wind hit his face. He was thinking about the letter again. Maybe he should finally let go of it. Maybe he should tell her. But the thought of disturbing the quiet balance they had built scared him. He respected her too much to risk turning nostalgia into pain. His phone buzzed, a message from his old assistant reminding him of an event that night. A charity dinner. He almost skipped it, but then saw the name on the guest list. Sandra Bullock. He stared at the screen for a long moment. His chest tightened. Was it a coincidence or something more? He arrived at the event quietly, avoiding the red carpet. Inside the hall, the soft sound of a piano floated through the air. Chandeliers glowed like small suns above the crowd. People smiled, greeted, and exchanged polite words. Keanu stayed near the back, comfortable in the shadows. And then he saw her. She was wearing a simple black dress, elegant but unpretentious. Her hair fell naturally, her smile calm but a little guarded. She was talking with another actor when her eyes briefly caught his from across the room. For a moment, the noise faded. They didn't move, didn't wave, just looked. And in that glance, 20 years disappeared. He walked toward her slowly. She met him halfway. Their conversation began with quiet laughter, the kind that carries too much history to explain. "You look the same," she said. "You don't," he replied gently. "You look stronger." They talked for a while about small things, safe things, movies, travel, old memories. But behind every word, both of them felt something unsaid pulsing underneath. Finally, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded note. His eyes widened. "I found this," she said softly. "Was it meant for me?" He took it carefully, staring at the familiar handwriting. It was his. He didn't remember leaving it anywhere. Maybe on a set table, maybe in a script folder. He looked at her and whispered, "I guess it finally found its way." She smiled, eyes shining with something fragile and old. "Someday came late," she said. The rest of the night felt like a dream. They spoke about their younger selves, about mistakes, about the peace that comes from accepting what could have been. When the event ended, they walked outside together into the cool night air. Cameras were flashing at the entrance, but neither cared. For once they felt invisible to the world. She asked quietly, "Do you ever wonder if things could have been different?" He looked up at the stars and said, "Sometimes I think they still can." They exchanged a look that carried years of unspoken emotion. Then she smiled and said, "Then maybe it's time we stop wondering." He wanted to answer, but just then his phone buzzed. He glanced down, a message from a producer about an early flight the next morning. Reality intruded, reminding him of how fragile moments can be. When he looked up again, she was already walking toward her car. She turned back once and said softly, "Good night, Keanu." He stood there until her car disappeared around the corner. Later that night, Sandra sat on her bed staring at her phone. She opened a new message and typed slowly, "I think someday finally arrived." She hesitated, finger hovering over the send button. But then she stopped. What if it was too late? What if she was reading the signs wrong? She deleted the message and sighed. She didn't know that, at that exact moment, Keanu was typing a message too. "I'm glad we met tonight. Maybe we should talk more often." He reread the words, unsure if they sounded too forward. He placed his phone on the nightstand and decided to sleep first. Both messages stayed unsent. The next morning, Sandra woke up early and reached for her phone. A notification flashed. Missed call. Her heart jumped when she saw his name. But it wasn't him. It was a reporter asking for comments about the charity event. Disappointment filled her chest. She brushed it off, trying to convince herself it didn't matter. She went to make coffee, but as she poured the milk, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was him. The message said, "Can we meet somewhere quiet? Just us." Her heart raced. She replied instantly, "Yes, you picked the place." He sent the address of a small bookstore cafe they both used to visit in the early 2000s, a place where they once spent hours talking about philosophy and film. She smiled, remembering how he used to hide behind books to avoid attention. She arrived early, nervous but hopeful. She wore simple jeans and a soft sweater, no makeup, just her natural self. She ordered his favorite coffee and waited. Minutes turned into an hour. He didn't come. She checked her phone again. "No new messages," she called, but the call went straight to voicemail. Her chest tightened. Something felt wrong. Later that evening, his assistant called her. Her voice was calm, but strange. "He had to leave town suddenly," she said. A friend of his was in an accident. Sandra felt the air leave her lungs. "Is he okay?" "He's fine," the assistant said softly. "But he left his phone behind in the car." Sandra looked at the untouched cup of coffee across the table, the one she had ordered for him. She whispered, "You never got my message either, did you?" As she left the cafe, rain began to fall again. Drops slid down her hair, mixing with something warm in her eyes. She didn't notice a small paper fluttering out of her pocket. The old note, the one that said, "For Sandra, someday." It landed under the table, unnoticed. And just like that, destiny played another small trick. Two hearts trying to meet again, separated once more by timing. That night, as Keanu sat in a hospital waiting room beside his injured friend, he reached for his phone and realized it wasn't there. He smiled bitterly, whispering to himself, "Guess I'll have to wait a little longer." And miles away, Sandra whispered almost the same words to the rain. Maybe someday still isn't today. Neither knew that the next time they'd see each other, everything would change forever. The silence before the reunion. Do you believe that fate waits for the exact second your heart gives up hope? Do you think love returns not when we chase it, but when we finally surrender? Their paths were quiet for a few days, yet their hearts never stopped listening. Sandra tried to lose herself in her work, pretending nothing had changed. She filmed long hours, smiled for cameras, gave interviews where she laughed easily. But when she returned home, silence greeted her. That kind of silence that reminds you something is missing. She often stood by her window at night watching the city lights flicker like restless thoughts. She wondered if he was still away, if he had read her last message, if he even knew she had waited. Keanu, on the other hand, spent those same days caring for his injured friend in a small hospital outside the city. He slept little, spoke softly, always kind even in exhaustion. Sometimes, when his friend was asleep, he sat by the window writing small lines on scraps of paper. Not full letters this time, just thoughts. He wrote about patience, about how love doesn't vanish. It only changes form. He never signed them. He didn't need to. One evening, as he walked out to buy coffee, his phone finally synced with his messages again. There it was, her text from 3 nights ago. Yes, you picked the place. He stopped on the sidewalk, eyes fixed on the glowing screen. He whispered, "You really came." He wanted to call her immediately, but something stopped him. It felt wrong to rush back while his friend still needed him. He decided to wait just one more day, but destiny never waits for perfect timing. That night, Sandra attended a quiet gathering hosted by an old director friend. It was at a small art gallery near the coast, full of photographs from their past films. She wasn't planning to go, but something about the invitation felt comforting. When she arrived, she saw familiar faces, laughter and nostalgia in the air. One wall was filled with behind-the-scenes photos, and there, in the corner, a picture she had never seen before. It was her and Keanu, taken secretly on set years ago. He was looking at her with a calm smile, unaware the camera was watching. She was laughing mid-sentence. The caption below read, "Some chemistry never fades." She touched the photo gently, feeling something inside her shift again. Maybe it wasn't too late after all. She turned to leave early, deciding to call him tonight. But when she stepped outside, the sky was turning gray. Wind carried the smell of sea and rain. She pulled out her phone and typed his name. Just as she was about to press call, a familiar voice said softly behind her, "You always leave early." She froze. She turned slowly. There he was, Keanu standing under the streetlight, holding a small umbrella, rain starting to fall around him. His eyes were tired but warm, as if the world had finally exhaled. For a moment, neither spoke. The world felt smaller, quieter. "You came back," she whispered. "I never really left," he said. They walked together along the wet street, sharing the umbrella. It wasn't a romantic scene like in movies. It was quiet, real, full of pauses that said more than words. He told her about his friend's accident, about the hospital, about losing his phone. She listened, her heart softening with every word. Finally, they stopped near a small bookstore, the same one from before. It was closed, but the lights inside glowed faintly. He smiled and said, "Remember this place." "How could I forget?" she replied. They stood there for a while, the rain surrounding them, their reflections blurred in the window. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in a handkerchief. "I was keeping this safe," he said, "but maybe it's time." He opened the cloth carefully. It was the old letter, the one he had written decades ago. She looked at it with wide eyes. He handed it to her. "You should read it," he said softly. She opened it with trembling hands. The paper was delicate, the ink still visible. The first line made her heart stop. "Thank you for being light when the world feels heavy." She read silently, her breath unsteady. Each line was simple, honest, full of gratitude, not confession. It wasn't about love declared, but love lived quietly, respectfully, without expectation. When she finished, she looked up, her eyes full of tears she didn't bother to hide. "Why didn't you ever send it?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Because I didn't want to change what was already beautiful." She shook her head, voice breaking. "You think silence protected us, but it only delayed us." He looked down, his jaw tightening. "Maybe you're right, but maybe it also saved us from breaking something we didn't understand back then." They stood under the rain again. Both right, both wrong, both full of emotions too heavy for words. After a long pause, she said quietly, "And what about now?" He met her eyes. Now maybe we understand. A slow smile crossed her face, not of joy but of recognition. Then maybe we should stop hiding behind someday. He nodded, barely breathing, and for the first time their silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like a beginning, but destiny had one more test to give. A passing car splashed water beside them, and in the sudden rush, the letter slipped from her hands, floating into the puddle, ink bleeding, words dissolving. She gasped and bent down, but it was too late. The paper melted into the rain, unreadable. Keanu looked at it quietly and said, "Maybe it's meant to fade now." She stood up, heart aching. "But I wanted to keep it." He smiled gently. "Some things we keep here," he said, touching his chest. They walked away slowly, hand in hand, saying nothing more. But as they reached the corner, his phone buzzed again. He ignored it. She noticed. "Aren't you going to check?" He shook his head. "Not tonight." What he didn't know was that the message waiting on his phone wasn't from a friend or a fan. It was from a journalist who had somehow found out about the letter, planning to publish the story the next morning. New details about Keanu Reeves' hidden love for Sandra Bullock. And by dawn, the whole world would know. The world that suddenly knew, do you believe that sometimes the world discovers your truth before you're ready to face it? Do you think love can survive when privacy is stolen by curiosity? That morning changed everything. Sandra woke to the sound of her phone vibrating endlessly. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was her agent or the studio. But when the calls didn't stop, she finally picked up. Her friend's voice on the other end was shaking. "Turn on the news," she said. The television screen filled the room with flashing headlines. Keanu Reeves' secret letter to Sandra Bullock uncovered. New details emerge about hidden love story. Photographs of them together appeared everywhere, from red carpets to behind-the-scenes stills. The news anchor spoke with excitement, repeating the same lines over and over, turning something sacred into a spectacle. Sandra's chest tightened. She turned off the TV and sat in silence. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through social media. Her name was trending in every country. Old interviews, fan theories, rumors, and even fake letters were spreading online. Some called it romantic, others called it scandalous. But all she felt was invaded. She didn't care about the gossip, but she cared about him. She knew how much he valued privacy, how much he protected his peace. And now the quiet world he built for himself was being torn open. She called him immediately, but it went to voicemail. She tried again, and again. Finally, she sent a message. They found the letter. "I'm so sorry. Call me when you can." Across the city, Keanu sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his own phone. Messages flooded in. Journalists, producers, friends. His publicist begged for a statement. He had already seen the news before she called. The headlines didn't anger him. They just felt heavy, like a memory being dragged into daylight before it was ready. He didn't blame her. He didn't even blame the reporters. He just wished the world would understand that not every story is meant to be consumed. He finally called her back. His voice was calm, but beneath it she could hear exhaustion. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "No," she whispered. "Are you?" he sighed. "I will be." "I never told anyone," she said quickly. "I don't even know how they found it." "It doesn't matter," he said softly. "What matters is how we handle it now." They agreed to meet that evening at a quiet park they both loved, away from cameras, away from noise. When they met, the sun was setting, the light turning gold between the trees. She looked at him with guilt in her eyes, but he smiled gently. "Don't look like that," he said. "It's not your fault." "They twisted it," she said. "They made it sound like you were hiding something dramatic." He nodded slowly. "People like drama. It sells better than peace." They sat on a wooden bench near the lake. Children played in the distance, their laughter echoing softly. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "I won't deny it and I won't explain it. Love doesn't always need defense." She looked down, her voice trembling. "But they'll keep asking questions." "Let them," he said. "They'll get bored eventually." She studied him for a long moment. His calmness wasn't detachment, it was grace, the kind that comes from years of understanding what truly matters. After a while, she said, "Maybe this happened for a reason." He turned toward her. "What reason?" She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Maybe we spent too long hiding from what was already there." He didn't answer. Instead, he looked out over the lake where the water shimmered in soft light. His thoughts were quiet, but his heart wasn't. The next day, a journalist managed to find where he lived. Cameras waited outside his building, shouting questions. He didn't respond. Instead, he left a note taped to his front door for the photographers to see. It said only, "Be kind. That's all that matters." The photo of that note spread faster than any rumor. Soon, people began talking less about scandal and more about his message. Kindness became the focus. Sandra watched it unfold online. Her respect for him deepened. She decided to do something too, not to defend herself, but to redirect the story. During an interview that week, when asked about the letter, she smiled calmly and said, "It was never a secret. It was friendship, respect, and shared humanity. That's all." The simplicity of her words disarmed everyone. The questions stopped. But later that night, when the noise faded again, she sat alone by her fireplace, thinking of him. She whispered, "Thank you for protecting me, even now." Across the city, he sat on his balcony, guitar resting on his lap, playing slow notes under the stars. His phone buzzed, a message from her. "I think the world just reminded us what matters most," he replied. "Maybe the world did us a favor." There was a pause before her next message. "Do you still believe in someday?" He looked at the sky, the same stars shining above both of them, and typed, "No, I believe in now." She smiled when she read it. But just as the piece was returning, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived at Sandra's home, sent anonymously. Inside was a copy of the original letter he had written decades ago, the one that had melted in the rain. The handwriting was identical, but this one contained a line she had never seen before, one that wasn't in the first version she read. It said, "If someday never comes, remember, you were the reason I believed in love again." She froze. Her heart pounded. She whispered to herself, "How could this exist?" She picked up her phone to call him, but before she could, a news alert appeared on her screen. Keanu Reeves cancels public appearances after unexpected incident in Los Angeles. Her phone slipped from her hand. The world outside continued to move, unaware that for two people, everything had just changed again. The night the world went quiet, do you believe that sometimes destiny doesn't test your strength? It tests your heart. Do you think love reveals its truth only when silence becomes unbearable? That night, silence became the only sound. The news broke just after midnight. Headlines appeared across every screen, whispering fragments of something unclear. Keanu Reeves involved in late-night incident in Los Angeles. Details were few. Witnesses said they saw a car swerve near the coast road, then stop suddenly. No one was sure what had happened next. Sandra's phone rang endlessly. Friends, reporters, assistants, everyone wanted answers. But all she wanted was to hear his voice. She didn't wait for confirmation. She grabbed her coat, keys, and drove through the rain-soaked streets toward the hospital they mentioned. Her hands shook the entire drive. Every red light felt like punishment. Every passing second a question she couldn't bear to ask. When she reached the hospital, cameras were already there. Flashes lit up the night like lightning. She pulled up her hood, pushed through the noise, and entered the corridor where nurses whispered softly. A familiar voice called her name. His assistant, eyes tired, face pale. "He's fine," she said quickly. "He's stable." It wasn't serious. Sandra exhaled, the breath she'd been holding for miles finally escaping. "What happened?" she asked. The assistant explained quietly. He was driving home after a long day. Someone followed him trying to take pictures. He swerved to avoid a cyclist. His car hit a divider. No one else was hurt. "He's resting now." Sandra nodded, tears welling. She whispered, "Can I see him?" The assistant hesitated, then nodded. "He's awake but tired." "Keep it brief." She walked slowly down the dim corridor, her footsteps echoing. When she reached the room, the door was half open. He was sitting up, one arm bandaged, his face pale but calm. When he saw her, his eyes softened instantly. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly. Then you don't know me at all, she replied, walking closer. She sat beside him, her eyes full of both anger and relief. Why didn't you call me? She whispered. I didn't want to worry you. Too late, she said, almost laughing through the tears. He smiled faintly. I'm okay, really. She looked at him for a long moment, searching for cracks behind the calm. I saw the letter, she said softly. The one that appeared at my house. His expression changed. What letter? She handed him her phone, showing a photo of it. The handwriting was his, same loops, same words, but his face went still as stone. That's not mine, he said. At least not this version. Then who sent it? He didn't answer. He leaned back slowly, thinking. Someone wants to keep this alive, he murmured. Someone who doesn't understand what it really was. She frowned. But it felt so real, Keanu. I thought it was you. He reached for her hand gently. It doesn't matter who wrote it. What matters is what we know. She squeezed his hand tighter, as if anchoring him to the present. A nurse entered quietly to check his vitals. As she adjusted the monitor, Keanu whispered, Could you give us a moment? The nurse nodded and left. He looked at Sandra again, his eyes deep with something unspoken. You know, he said, maybe this is the universe telling us to stop waiting. She tilted her head. Waiting for what? For perfect timing, he said. There's no such thing. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping softly on the window. She leaned closer, whispering, So what do we do now? He smiled faintly. We live honestly. Whatever comes next, we face it together. For the first time, she saw a glimpse of the peace he had been searching for all his life. They sat in silence, their hands still entwined. Outside, the world argued, speculated, searched for headlines. Inside, two souls finally stopped pretending they didn't need each other. Hours later, as dawn approached, she helped him walk out of the hospital quietly, avoiding cameras. They drove through empty streets, the city still half asleep. When they reached the beach, the same one where he had once read her old letter, they got out. The sea was calm, the sky pale gold. He stood there, breathing deeply, eyes closed. You always come here when things fall apart, she said softly. Because it reminds me they always fall back together, he replied. She smiled, tears shining like salt on her skin. They walked along the shore, slow and quiet. At one point, he stopped and looked at her seriously. There's something I never told you, he said. She turned toward him, heart steady now. What is it? The letter wasn't the only one I wrote. Her eyes widened. What do you mean? He nodded slowly. There were 3. The first one you found. The second one I destroyed. The third one, he paused. I kept it somewhere safe. What did it say? He hesitated. It said that someday if we ever met again and still felt the same, I'd stop being afraid. She took a deep breath. And do you still feel the same? He looked at her, eyes reflecting the rising sun. More than ever. Before she could respond, a sudden gust of wind blew sand across the shore, and something small fluttered at their feet. A piece of old paper, half buried. She bent down and picked it up. The edges were torn, the ink faded, but she could still read the words. If love is real, it finds its own way home. They looked at each other, both smiling, both fighting tears, he whispered. Guess the universe kept my promise for me. She placed the paper gently in his hand. Then maybe it's time to stop writing letters and start living them. He nodded, holding her gaze, the morning light washing over both of them. But as they walked back to the car, a black envelope waited on the windshield. No name, no address, just a single sentence written across the front. The truth isn't over yet. She looked at him, fear flickering behind her calm. He opened it slowly, his expression unreadable. Inside was a photograph, the two of them from the night at the park, taken secretly from afar. Someone was watching them. The truth that finally spoke, do you believe that love becomes strongest when tested by the unseen? Do you think the universe hides answers until two souls are ready to face them? That morning, truth finally stopped hiding. The black envelope lay between them, wet with sea mist, heavy with questions neither wanted to ask. Keanu turned it over in his hands, studying the grain of the paper. Sandra stood beside him, the ocean wind pulling gently at her hair. There was something strange about the photo inside. Not just that it had been taken in secret, but the angle. Whoever took it had been close, too close. Someone's following you, she whispered. He nodded slowly. No, someone's following us. They drove back to the city in silence, the envelope resting on the dashboard. When they reached his apartment, he poured her a cup of tea and sat beside her. The light through the window fell across his face, soft and steady. Maybe this is all just curiosity, she said. Maybe someone just wanted proof of what people already suspected. Maybe, he replied quietly. But that letter you got, the fake one, this photo, it feels deliberate. He reached for his drawer, pulling out a small stack of papers. Among them were fragments of old fan mail, letters from strangers who claimed to know their story better than they did. He never replied to them, but now one letter caught his eye. The handwriting matched the envelope. He read it aloud softly. Some people don't deserve to stay hidden forever. They looked at each other, realization dawning slowly. It's someone who knew about the original letter, she said. Someone from the set back then, he nodded. Someone who saw me write it. For a long time, neither spoke. They just sat there, memories unfolding between them like old film reels. Then he smiled faintly. You know, maybe it doesn't matter who it is, she frowned. How can you say that? He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Because for years, I hid what I felt to protect something fragile. But that secrecy only created more confusion. Maybe this is the world's strange way of saying, no more hiding. She watched him closely, the truth of his words sinking in. You really mean that? He turned toward her fully, his voice steady, almost a whisper. I do. I'm tired of waiting for the right moment. Every moment with you has been right, just unfinished. Her eyes filled with tears, soft and bright. So what happens now? He smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Now we finish it. They decided to make it simple. No press statement, no explanation, no denial. They would just live openly. Two people connected by years of timing, silence, and fate. That evening, they walked together through a quiet art district hand in hand. People noticed, whispered, smiled, but neither cared. For the first time, they weren't playing characters. They were just themselves. Later, as night settled in, they sat at their favorite cafe, the same one where he once read the first letter alone. The waitress recognized them, smiled warmly, and brought their drinks without asking. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Sandra looked at him across the table and said softly, You know what's funny? He raised an eyebrow. What? After everything, after all the letters and silence and years apart, the only thing that feels real is this, sitting here, doing nothing. He smiled. Sometimes peace is the loudest truth. They both laughed quietly. The kind of laughter that comes from finally letting go of everything that hurt. But just as they were about to leave, an old man from another table walked over. He looked familiar, the retired cinematographer who had worked on their first movie. He placed a small brown envelope on their table. I think this belongs to you, he said kindly. Keanu opened it slowly. Inside was the original letter, the one he thought had dissolved in the rain. Preserved, clean, real. How did you get this? Keanu asked. The old man smiled. I found it years ago, stuck between pages of an old script. I didn't know if it was personal, so I kept it safe. But when I saw the news, I realized it was time to give it back. He left them with a small nod, walking into the night. Keanu unfolded the letter carefully. The ink was faint, but the words still spoke clearly. Thank you for being light when the world feels heavy. Thank you for reminding me that kindness can exist without demand. If someday never comes, know this. You were my quiet miracle. Sandra reached across the table, taking his hand. You kept thanking me, she whispered. But you never knew what you gave me. He looked up. What did I give you? A reason to believe love could be kind. They sat there in silence, the city alive around them, but their world perfectly still. The next morning, the media talked less. The noise faded. The internet found new stories. The letter became just another piece of nostalgia. But for them, it became a beginning. Not of a romance that needed headlines, but of something truer. In the months that followed, they worked on a small independent project together, a quiet film about connection, loss, and the courage to speak when silence feels safer. It wasn't about them, but everyone who watched it felt it was. When it premiered, they stood side by side as the audience clapped softly. There were no declarations, no grand gestures, just two people who had finally found peace after the event. As they stepped outside into the cool night, she looked at him and asked, "So what happens when the world forgets again?" He smiled, eyes gentle. "Then we remember for them." She leaned against his shoulder as they walked toward the car. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, the same way they had years ago when everything began, and somewhere in a drawer, the old letter rested quietly, no longer a secret, no longer a burden, just a reminder that some love stories aren't written for the world to understand. They're written for the hearts that lived them, and this time, they didn't fade with the rain.